I grew up just off of the Mohawk River, and it's got an interesting story. For centuries, people used its waters to move across New York. Geographically, it begins in Oneida County, where its east and west branches meet and flows east. Then, it cuts through the Mohawk Valley, there's no coincidence there, and passes through Herkimer and Montgomery counties, where tributaries such as West Canada Creek and Schoharie Creek add volume to its flow. From there, it continues through Schenectady County and the Capital Region before finally emptying into the Hudson River. In this video, my goal is to trace its specific course through time. The story of the Mohawk River begins with the last ice age. Melting water from a gigantic glacier created the Ira-Mohawk River, carving deep channels and shaping a natural corridor with the Mohawk River right in the middle of it. Indigenous peoples settled along the fertile riverbanks, living in seasonal villages and longhouse communities. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy would eventually form, made up of 5 nations. The Mohawk Nation, as keepers of the eastern door, guarded access along the river. The term Mohawk roughly translates to man-eaters, but that's just Algonquin propaganda. They instead referred to themselves as Kanyen Kehaka, or People of the Flint. They called the river Tionan Tatati, meaning flows through a mountain. It was a superhighway of sorts, providing connection across distant communities. Villages near present-day Utica, Fonda, and Orisville thrived. Upriver, a portage route in Oneida Nation territory, known as the Oneida Carry, allowed boats to move from the Mohawk River to Wood Creek, and this was a linchpin in a massive transportation network. European presence in the region largely began with Henry Hudson sailing up the Hudson aboard a ship called the Half Moon. His journey marked the start of Dutch influence in what became New Netherland. Cohoes Falls acted as a natural barrier on the Mohawk River, but looking at old maps, you can tell the Dutch knew something was out there. Fort Nassau and later Fort Orange were built nearby, anchoring Dutch control in today's Albany. The first recorded European exploration of the Mohawk River was by Harman Meinderts van den Bogart in 1634. He noted the Haudenosaunee people's desire for European trade goods in exchange for beaver pelts, which was quickly becoming a major market. The thriving fur trade highlighted rich farmland along the river, and in 1661, Arent van Curler led families upriver to establish Schenectady. Then, the English ousted the Dutch, and Albany County was created, encompassing much of the Mohawk River. To protect their claims, the British built Fort Hunter in 1712 at the mouth of the Schoharie Creek. Soon after, Palatine German families began settling further up the river, establishing German flats. Later, Herkimer and St. Johnsville would emerge as agricultural hubs. Getting up to these spots wasn't easy, however. At certain locations, navigating the river remained difficult due to rapids. The response was bateaux, these French-named flat-bottom boats. Then you have the 7 Years' War, where fighting between the French and British led to some massacres along the river. But eventually, the British won, and peace would return. For a time, anyway. It wasn't long before the colonies of Great Britain sought independence, and this led to further chaos along the Mohawk. You could even say it led to drums along the Mohawk. Early in the War for Independence, the British attempted to seize Albany, but were stopped at the Oneida Carry via Fort Stanwix. A major battle subsequently erupted nearby, close to a native village we call Oriskany, on the Mohawk's southern shore. War would eventually pass, like the flowing of the river, and treaties led to the displacement of many Haudenosaunee. Settlers began arriving, and founded communities like Whitestown along the riverbanks. Hoffman's Ferry became an important point of navigation, and in 1795, a bridge between Cohoes and Waterford was completed, marking the first major river crossing. It wasn't long before more bridges followed, like one between Schenectady and Scotia. And speaking of engineering, to overcome rapids at Little Falls, the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company built locks and dams, and eventually connected the Mohawk to Wood Creek via canal in 1797. During this time, county lines were being established and adjusted, more or less forming the borders that we know today. Early mail service utilized the river, and by the early 1800s, Durham boats replaced bateaux, offering more reliable support. However, this would all be pretty much unnecessary with the advent of the Erie Canal in the 1820s. It pretty much ran parallel to the river, crossing over a couple of times at the Rexford and Crescent aqueducts, and ultimately linking Albany to Buffalo. Like many settlements, the village of Fultonville sprang up alongside the canal. Ilion developed into a major manufacturing town, and around this time, an increasing number of freedom seekers were crossing the Mohawk on their way to Canada as part of the Underground Railroad. Above-ground railroads would also follow the path of the river, and prosperity followed. Villages like Fort Plain flourished, and, of all things, cheese manufacturing really took off. In the village of Delta, my ancestors built a canning factory along the Mohawk. In Canajoharie, Beechnut was producing baby foods, and General Electric in Schenectady revolutionized the use of electricity. They even had a trolley bridge here, crossing the river, and it was the world's longest at the time. At Vischer's Ferry and Dunsback Ferry, more bridges further enabled the movement of goods and people. In the early 1900s, ice jams and spring floods caused damage, prompting extensive river management. Sections of the Mohawk were canalized and incorporated into a major upgrade of the Erie Canal. Near Delta, the river was dammed, flooding the village to create the Delta Reservoir, and the Hinckley Reservoir would follow as well. Many changes were made, including straightening long sections of the Mohawk so larger vessels could pass through, and bridge dams that you might recognize today. By 1918, the new and improved Erie Barge Canal opened. But water travel was on its way out. With Route 5 in the 1930s and Interstate 90 in the 1950s, automobiles were quickly changing everything. It's important to point out, though, that both of these routes would essentially parallel the Mohawk River. You can even see it when driving in some stretches. In recent decades, there have been issues with flooding and responses to prevent it, such as the building of retaining walls in Amsterdam. All in all, though, even with change, the Mohawk remains an important waterway and continues to do its thing, as it has for millennia. I hope you enjoyed this fourth dimensional look at its journey, and if you haven't already, I recommend you check it out in person, and maybe even raise a boy next to it. Have a good one.